Hi, folks. Welcome to the workshop. I'm really excited to be doing this. Less excited to be doing this from my home in Sydney. I was all pumped to get down to South Australia and visit Golden Boy again, but these things happen and I'll have to eat amazing Thai food another time. It's wonderful to meet you all. I'm Joan Westenberg. I want to start off this workshop by just acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and the elders past, present, and yet to come. I'm here in Sydney, obviously, so I'd like to acknowledge the elders of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. What are we doing today? We're doing a workshop about content and comms. Now, this workshop is called How to Be Very Fucking Good at Content and Comms. Now, there's a reason I've picked that title. Content and comms is actually about finding a way to stand out, to be noticed, to be recognized in the noise. The white noise of just layers and layers all around us. You know, when we're talking online, we're communicating online, we aren't competing with other comms professionals. There are some of them out there, but we are competing with every single other human on this planet who has an internet connection. We're competing with Donald fucking Trump and whatever he's up to now. We are competing with our message on the same wavelength as random trolls, as teenagers who just got their first phone, and as presidents and prime ministers. That noise is such a huge amount to cut through. The reason I try to make all of my titles, all of my comms bold and innovative is because it makes people stop and just question, okay, well, what's going on here? By calling this presentation How to Be Very Fucking Good at Content and Comms, I'm not only grabbing people's attention, but I'm also doing something else. I'm using the language that I've chosen to filter out people who I don't want to hang out with and don't want to talk to because they might be conservative or boring enough to be objecting to my language. Now, I'm starting this workshop by talking about that because for me, the building blocks of content and comms are the words we use, the words we choose, and the language that shapes our approach. You know, there's chess and there's a game of chess. There's words and there's language. And when we approach content, when we approach communicating to a wider audience, we are playing in the space between those things. I've been doing content and comms for 15 years now. I started off as a teenager who was obsessed with being online because, let's be real, everyone who's transgender and doesn't want to admit it yet does spend a lot of time online. It's kind of the defining factor. That's why we're all so good at coding. And I was obsessed with the internet. I was obsessed with building websites and writing online and being techie and nerdy and being into all this stuff. I got my first job doing an internship at a tech company. I did a bunch of work with MySpace. I had some weird little career mishaps where I was a musician for some time, but the defining characteristic of my working life has been that I guide the narrative and the story of different companies that use technology to impact the world. When I do that today, I talk about standing between companies and helping tech-enabled brands communicate with real humans. Because those of us who are in technology, we aren't normal humans. You know, we are a bunch of freaky, nerdy, geeky people who just can't get enough of technology that other people find boring. You know, we get excited about the latest tools. We get excited about the latest developments. I have spent all week barely sleeping because Apple have a bunch of new MacBooks coming out. We're these kind of people who speak a different language. And so what I want to do as a storyteller, as somebody who does content and comms, is communicate and translate that difference to the wider public. Now, this workshop, How to Be Very Fucking Good at Content and Comms, is going to walk you through a bunch of the things that I've learned throughout my career and hopefully give you some straight down to the brass knuckles tips, how to use and insights into running and executing content and comms. Let's dive right into it. I'm going to share my screen and you can see the presentation, which will not win any awards, but thankfully I win awards anyway, so it's okay. You're going to have to forgive a certain degree of just blatant arrogance this morning because I'm tired and it comes out. It's my way of just like projecting that I know what I'm talking about. So let's all just jump on board with that. Yay. If you have any questions, comments, or you want to just put your hand up, feel free to do that. Do it in the QA, do it in the chat channel. I'll try to mark that as much as I can. All right. So the number one thing that you're going to learn if you're doing content and comms is scope creep. What the hell is scope creep? It's that everyone thinks just because you are a content or a comms person, you're a PR person, you're a marketing person, that therefore you should be able to be the absolute bitch of every fucking department in a startup. By which we mean that, hey, people need some copy for a new button. Guess whose job it is to write that? People need a bio for the CEO because she's been invited to speak on a panel. Guess whose job it is to write that? People need to have an apology email because someone in the engineering department screwed up a feature and the platform isn't working. Guess who has to write that? Scope creep means that although your purview is to do content and comms, what that is actually defined as can twist, turn, grow, evolve, and just transform into some kind of Brobdingnagian Cthulhu-like structure or creature that just rages out of control. So if you're doing this kind of job, if you're doing this kind of role, you have to be able to manage what is your responsibility and what is not, and you've got to be able to say no. The thing about content and comms is because it can encompass so many things, you as a comms professional, you as the comms department of a startup, you as a founder who does content and comms, you're going to be blamed for anything that even looks like a screw up, if it even looks like it touches on your domain. You've got to be able to say no really firmly. You've got to be able to control what you do and don't pay attention to. So as I said, comms is everything and everything is comms. The truth is that whatever a company does, whatever a founder does that gets into the public eye, that stuff is content and comms, and it shapes how people view and perceive your brand and who you are. Whether it's a founder who tweets a link to something, and it's a founder who likes somebody's post on Facebook, whether it's a public statement, whether it's a blog post, whether it's an email that gets sent out, everything touches on the comms narrative that you build around your company. And what you're going to find is that the impact of it all is very hard to draw back to control if you aren't doing it intentionally. And so it's important to think about every piece of content, every word and where it's placed. It's important to think about how that's going to make people feel in the wider public. It's important to remember that even internal comms have the danger or the risk of eventually becoming external comms. So when you do anything at all, when you put your pen to paper, when you sit down your keyboard, think about the end user and think about how they're going to feel when they consume this stuff, because everything is comms. All right, it's really hard to measure and demonstrate the value of what we do. I have learned this the hard way because I've had too many people say, okay, well, why are we paying for this stuff if we can't attribute data and numbers to it? I've had too many people say, okay, well, what's this PR story worth? What's this blog post worth to us for our CAC? And all these questions are really valid, but PR and comms, while it's incredibly powerful, is not always easy to measure in this way. So my thing is that you have to always be telling your story. As a professional, you've got to be telling the narrative of who you are and what you're doing and why it's important and what you're achieving. The way I do this is I always make a deck. No matter what, I make a deck. If I have a win, I make a deck. If I have an idea, I make a deck. If I just want to prove a point to somebody, I make a deck. One of my friends is in content and comms, and when she was planning out her honeymoon, in order to present the plans to her partner, she made a deck. It's what we do because you're able to shape the story internally and show people what matters about the way you're thinking. And you can also say, this is the impact that I'm having, and this is why it's so important for the growth of this company. When you're structuring your deck as a comms pro, there are a bunch of ways to do it. And the starting point that most people seem to go for is they go on Google and they look up Airbnb's pitch deck. The truth is, that's kind of a waste of time because none of us are Airbnb and none of us are in that period of time. None of us are in that location. When we copy people's pitch decks, we copy these winning startup fundraising pitch decks, whatever it is, we're actually just shooting ourselves in the fucking foot because we're not doing a story, telling a story, shaping a story that's designed for us. We're just trying to copy and paste from somebody else's narrative, and every story is different. So I can't tell you, okay, this is a perfect deck, that's a perfect deck, go and do these ones, but I can tell you the building blocks and the shape of a good deck. Tell people why they're here. Tell people about the specific problem that you want to solve. Tell people what you're going to be showing them. Tell them the work, the plan, the idea, whatever it is itself. Tell them the next steps and tell them any concerns or worries you have about this. So if you're pitching a startup, why are you here? You're here because X problem. There's an issue in global carbon emissions, for example, just drawing an example from one of the startups that I work with. What's the specific problem with climate change? Well, the specific problem this startup can talk about is that 8% of climate change carbon emissions come from food waste. What are we showing them today in this deck? Well, we'd be showing them a product that can have an impact on that 8% number by reducing food waste. And then we show them the product, how it works, what it does, what its outcomes are. And then from the next point onwards, we say the preferred next steps. If we proceed with this pitch, if we get funding, if we get whatever the call to action is, we are going to hire people, or we are going to develop this new part of the technology. We're going to invest in a new partnership. Any concerns you have, this is important because nobody wants to listen to a pitch where the comms pro, the founder, whoever they are just saying everything's perfect, because it's a lie. What you want to do with this next step is actually be honest, brutally honest about any concerns you have. What sucks? What scares the hell out of you? If you can structure a deck like this, you'll be presenting a comms message that is clear, bold, strong, honest, and authentic. And that kind of stuff, it really shines through. People often think the job of a comms person is to lie gracefully. And that's not the truth. I'm really good at lying gracefully, but the actual job is just to tell a story in a way that gets cut through. And I'll tell you something that I've learned from not just my work, but my relationships, everything I've done in my life. Nothing gives you cut through more than radical authenticity and honesty. As comms pros, if you remember that, you're going to have a little bit of traction. All right, so I want to spend some time talking about public relations because that's a huge part of our role, and it's a huge part of what founders and comms folks actually have to do. Public relations gets a bad rap. It gets a bad rap because we kind of deserve it. Our industry, the PR industry, is not a noble one. The background of public relations, I'll be really honest with you, is dirty as fuck. It's terrible. The whole history of what we do has been massively shaped and impacted by the Nazi Party in World War II and the principles that they adopted and turned into propaganda. Some of the earliest public relations wins were to promote smoking. You know, there's a famous story about a PR agency who recognized that after World War I, people weren't smoking cigarettes as much because they could afford more expensive tobacco products. And so they decided that they wanted to tackle the issue that women didn't smoke because it wasn't seen as graceful. So they hired a bunch of women to march as suffragettes in a Macy's Day parade, smoking, and they called it the Torches of Liberty Parade because they said that they were taking a stand for women's rights to do whatever they wanted with their bodies. And it was a PR win. It was a win for feminism at the time, but it was actually an entirely fabricated piece of propaganda for the tobacco industry and for smoking. And this is the background that we have as PR people. We are building on some pretty nefarious things because our job is to shape public perception. And it's to do that through the power of mass media. We've seen how that works and how that plays out with Donald Trump and the election and so on. The power of the media is huge. And if you can influence it, shape it, respond to it, and so on, you can really do some damage. You can really have an impact. You can make a startup successful. You can make a democracy a little bit less successful. You can do all these kinds of things. And it's hugely powerful. The trick is that as comms pros, we don't want to be evil. If we're evil, if we are manipulative, if we're trying to chip away at the press, we're actually destroying people's faith in the press. We're actually destroying our own careers and livelihoods. So to be very fucking good at PR, it's not actually about manipulation. It's not actually about spin. It's about building authentic relationships and telling real stories. So first up, if you're doing a PR pitch, remember this. Journalists do not give a fuck about your press release. And I'm being really honest here. Every startup founder gets really excited about doing a press release. They're like, oh, we're going to get some press coverage. We're going to do a release. And they write this press release according to this outdated structure that everyone thinks is the right way to do a press release. And it's based on when newspapers were still a thing, and it's based on column inches. And it's just, journalists don't have the time to be reading press releases. Journalists are really tired because in Australia alone in the past 18 months, 140 newsrooms have closed down. and the journalists that are left are struggling to maintain their editorial output with reduced budgets and a massive workload. So when you send them all this stuff, they just don't have the time and they don't care. When you're doing a PR pitch, what you actually want to do is give a time-poor journalist the maximum amount of information in the shortest time possible. And sometimes that's just a DM on Twitter, or it's an email with bullet points. If somebody is not going to respond to a pitch with an email that just has bullet points about what you're doing, they're not going to respond to full-on press release either. They don't have the time. Never do a group email blast to journalists because they will remember you. Journals get treated like commodities a lot. And I think part of that is it's the fault of a lot of us in tech. You know, we want to hack PR. We want to try to get maximum result with the minimum effort. But because journalists cover stuff and are interested in stuff and sift through the huge level of comms in their inboxes according to personal relationships, personal experience, touch points with founders and so on, if you are transactional about your approach to a journalist, they're going to remember that and they won't put their faith in you. Building a really strong, positive, ongoing, lasting relationship is not easy. But you have to treat people like humans. Whether they're your investors, whether they're your employees, stakeholders, customers, whether they're journalists. Treat people like actual human beings. It goes a really long way. And people will be able to tell that you aren't there just to get something out of them. You aren't there just to get an article or piece of coverage. You are trying to build a relationship because you're interested in what they write and what they cover and so on. You can actually create something that lasts. I think that's powerful. Here's something important to remember. You are not going to get coverage on the basic startup crap that most people want to get coverage on. Got a new product launch? Congratulations. Nobody cares. Got a new feature launch? Good for you. Your users might give a shit. The press doesn't. Have a new hire? Well, save it for LinkedIn. Nobody actually cares about any of this stuff because it's not a story. You've got to think to yourself, if you're trying to get public relations coverage, you're trying to get people to talk about you, you've got to ask this question. Who is going to want to read about this story? And would a normal human being, normal person want to hear about this story? Because I can tell you, like, even as an abnormal human being, even as a tech tragic, most of the time, I don't give a fuck what somebody's new job title is or who's been hired at what company. Salesforce has a new CMO. Congratulations. I don't care. There's not a story there. A story is something that touches on human interest, human empathy, inspiration, motivation, fear, anger, whatever it is. A story has to have more than just, here's something new our startup is doing. As far as I'm concerned, a really powerful technology and startup public relations story is told on 3 levels. Number 1, the most important level, you have to tell the story of the end users. The people whose lives are going to be changed or are actively changed already by your product or service. Who are they? What do they look like? What was life before you? What's life now? How much of an impact have you had? Number 2, you've got to tell the story of the founders themselves. Who are these people? Are they excited about it? Are they passionate? Do they have an inspiring backstory about why this product and this vertical is the one they chose? And the last level, the technology. You can't just go out there and get coverage because you've got a marketplace startup. You've got to say that there's something interesting about that tech. Because anyone can build a marketplace startup. I could build a marketplace startup this afternoon. It'd take me 2 hours. That's not exciting. There has to be something interesting about that tech that makes it stand out. The most exciting company I have ever worked with, and I'm working with them now, they're called GoTerra. And they are incredible. They use maggots combined with robots to break down food waste to destroy carbon emissions. It's so exciting. That technology inspires me. But then they've got the other layers going too. Their founder, Olympia, has a wonderful personal story. She's one of the most inspiring human beings I've ever met. She's come through like so much to build this startup and make it a reality. And then you think about the end users, it's absolutely every generation of people who are on this planet right now whose lives will be positively changed by reducing a carbon footprint. And so a really good tech PR story tells on those 3 levels. and it enables people to start to believe in your product and start to believe in the coverage behind it. All right, if you are coordinating an interview, prep for it. Is anybody here a startup founder or CEO? I'm assuming a bunch of you probably are. Okay. No matter how good you think you are about talking about your product, talking about what you do, the truth is you probably suck, because you are so in the weeds. You know, you are right there. You are doing it every single day. And so for you, it's so exciting. And you're like, hey, I can talk for hours about it. But the stuff that you can talk about is stuff that most people don't really care about. Sooner or later, it kind of just feels like you're telling a bunch of strangers about your Dungeons and Dragons character. It's like you're just not going to get through to people. So you need to prep for every single interview. And I don't mean, okay, you've got a bunch of interviews one week because there's a launch coming up. I mean, every time there's an interview, sit down, do an interview prep, go through a bunch of hard questions, go through a bunch of hard stuff and see what your answers are. Rehearse it, run through it, never speak off the cuff. You get somebody speaking off the cuff, sooner or later they present some kind of idiotic personal opinion that you just didn't want them to express. Like, trying to think of the dumbest opinion somebody could express in an interview. The Hobbit movies were good, something like that. All right. Don't ever make the mistake of thinking that a journalist or an editor cares about what you want or thinks that you're important, but be polite and respectful and professional anyway. You do not matter to the press. And that's not me insulting the press, and it's not me insulting you. It's tying back into that thing I said before. They're stressed, they're tired, they've got so much going on, they can't respond to everyone. And if they get egotistical startup folks, egotistical founders trying to like yell at them in their inboxes, harass them, do a million follow-ups, it's just going to stress them out all the more. Don't keep on following people up. Don't keep on harassing people. Be respectful, be calm. There's a great story from a couple of years back. Honestly, I can't remember what startup it was now, but they sold to Yahoo in the end for a few $1 million. But in the early stages, their CEO was this young kid. He was like 17, 18, something like that. And he harassed a bunch of TechCrunch journalists with hundreds of emails, begging them for coverage, finally hitting on stuff like, I'm crying because you won't cover my startup. Why do you want to hurt me so much? And so on and so on and so on. And TechCrunch decided to cover it by just publishing all of those emails. If you are going to be getting in journalists' faces like that, just be prepared for the fact that they will bite back. Okay, so everyone is going to have an idea about how everything should be written, and they're probably wrong. Tell them they're wrong, praise them when they're right, and if they won't, just leave you alone. Make a deck about why you're right. This ties into the scope creep thing I was talking about earlier. The thing is that like everyone out there thinks that they can write because they had to write a bunch of essays in high school. But nobody calls themselves an engineer or a programmer because they had to do some HTML codes in high school. And so it's this like absolute dichotomy. It drives me nuts. People will honestly believe that they are writers just because they can write. This is not true. Writing is like, it's a craft and it takes years of dedication to learn. And you have to keep on practicing it and practicing it or you lose the skill. I am a writer and I'm a damn good one. And it's because I've worked hard to be one. I am writing every single day. I've written for over 40 publications. I write 500 words every single day. I keep on practicing that craft in the same way that the engineers at your company who are building the products sit down and practice their code every single day. In the same way that your CTO, she's not just like sitting there being like, oh yeah, I'm a dev. I don't have to touch code. She's out there doing that work. That's what writers are. And so people have this idea that just because they can write, they get to tell you how to write, and it's wrong. They will miss the nuances. They will miss the little niggly bits here and there that change the meaning of every single thing you do. Don't let people railroad you just because they have a way of expressing something. You're the writer here. You're the comms person. You're the storyteller. Do it right. And lastly, stop complicating shit. Just give journalists a Google Doc. Give people a Google Doc. Give them a Google slideshow. Don't be sending people all this kind of complicated stuff. Don't be sending PDFs. Don't be sending high-res images. People want a high-res image, they're going to ask for it. They don't want it right in their inbox. Just think about what's the easiest way to communicate to a journalist who doesn't have much time, and then do that. The principle here for this one is not that Google Docs is better than everything else. It's that you need to streamline their job for them. All right, that's public relations. That's a quick brain dump of why I'm so good at public relations. Yay. Next thing, I'm going to talk about how to be very fucking good at content. Oh, I hate that word, content. It's like, what does it even mean anymore? You know, it means all kinds of things. My friends who are sex workers refer to their digital work as content. My friends who are VCs refer to their thought leadership posts as content. It covers all manner of sins. And by sins, I'm talking about the venture capitalists, not the sex workers. My thing about content is that it is not blog posts and emails and videos and so on. That's just collateral. Content is the DNA of your message and your company and your way of thinking and your story. The content is supported by all that collateral, but there's got to be actual content. It can't just be shallow, empty crap. If you're doing content, you need to set expectations. Telling a story takes time. You don't just like publish something and then immediately everyone cares, everyone pays attention, everyone clicks to your company website, everyone invests in your startup or buys your product or whatever it is. It takes time. You do content for 3 months, it's not going to work. You do content for 6 months, it might work. You do content for a year, it will work. You've got to invest in that time. But you've also got to make sure that you're not overselling what you're doing. Never tell people that content is the silver bullet or content is king or whatever the hell Gary Vaynerchuk says, because he's wrong. Tell people that you're investing in a long-term storytelling practice. If you're trying to create content, you need to be able to create collateral. You've got to be a slashy. If you're in a startup, you can't go and hire a whole team to do this stuff. It's your job to make everything. It's your job to know how to make everything. It's your job at the point where you do have enough money raised or enough products sold, you can hire other people to know enough about creating this collateral that you know when they're doing it right and when they're doing it wrong. But you've also got to be able to just hack shit together and make it work. The thing about content in a startup is because you are competing with everything else online and you are competing with presidents and prime ministers, like I said, you've got to be able to do everything you can to stand out. When I was working with Flair, one of our challenges was launching a superannuation fund. Okay, and our competitors all were trying to make Apple Wallet integrations work because they figured that was going to be a really important thing, and they were going through all these processes, try to get approvals, try to do all this stuff through Apple. And instead of doing that, I hacked together a content workflow using IFTTT Zapier, and it just worked. I looked at what the content was. The content was our membership info, our membership story, our membership narrative. I had a look at the collateral that needed to happen, the Apple Passport, and I found a way to get there as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, with as little friction as possible, and that made a difference. Being really good at content is not about just trying to find the most perfect way to do something. It's finding the things that work and getting it out there. Perfection is the enemy of everything we do. I would much rather publish 6 blog posts that are full of typos and grammatical errors that I can fix later than just publish one post that's fucking perfect where I have only one chance to get read, one chance to get heard. It's not that it's always quality over quantity. It's just that you can't be a perfectionist and sit around not publishing stuff because you're waiting for it to be like Oscar award winning. You know, it's just, it doesn't work. Perfection will always hold you back. But the thing is, in startups, we have this concept and this notion of the MVP that we all believe in, you know, the minimum viable product. We love that. We want to have the shortest path to getting something to market to see how it survives contact with the enemy, to see how it survives contact with the customers, see how it survives contact with the wider world. And so we don't think that these platforms need to be perfect. We know that they are imperfect. when they just have to work and show whether or not people respond. But then when it comes to content, we're suddenly these massive perfectionists, and we're like, hey, this stuff has to be award-winning right out the gate. This stuff has to be getting badges from whatever fucking advertising award thing. This content has to be stunning. This content has to be Star Wars Episode 4. Hey, it's okay if this content is Star Wars Episode 1. Like, it does not have to be perfect. If there's Jar Jar Binks running around in the background, that's fine as long as you get it out the door. And on that, boring content matters. I have written some of the most boring stuff in my time. I have done content and comms as an internal person, as an intern, as a manager, as a writer, as a director of PR, and as the founder of my own PR firm for everything from blockchain stuff. By the way, the blockchain is stupid, to accounting stuff. I've done all this, and sometimes it's okay for it to be boring. Sometimes it's okay for it to just be solid information that people need to learn. When I was working at Flair, I did a bunch of stuff about getting onboarding right in hospitality. And let me tell you, I have never and will never give a fuck about onboarding in hospitality, because the only time it mattered to me was when I was onboarded to work at McDonald's, and I can't remember the entire process because I was 13 and I just wanted to get paid to make burgers. This content is boring, but it pays off. So you've got to invest time in it, and you can't always be on the cutting edge. When you're doing content, it's the same as doing PR. You've got to be running an internal campaign. You've got to be telling people what you're doing. You've got to be saying to everyone in the room, this is what I've done, this is why it matters, this is why it's important, because otherwise people are just going to look at your output and be confused about what you're doing and why you're doing it, and they won't care. As far as I'm concerned, the content production department of a startup is just as important as the customer support department. You really cannot function without it, no matter how much your founders might convince themselves that they can. But the way to prove to everyone in the company is just to keep running an internal campaign. If you've got something that you're launching, whether it's a story or a blog post, have a launch plan for everyone else in the company too. And if you have a win, shout about it. Tell the world, tell everyone, text everyone. Make sure that everyone knows that you are doing really well. Tell all the people at your current company, tell the people at the company you want to work at next, tell your investors, tell your founders, tell your co-workers, tell your brother's ex-fiance who you occasionally message on Instagram because you kind of hit it off that one time you got drinks together. Just make sure that everyone knows that you are doing cool stuff. Don't wait for wins of the week or whatever your startup has in place to celebrate stuff while the sales team get drunk. Just yell about how well you're doing. Make sure people know. All right, this is a truly crucial and vital part of the content and comms puzzle piece collection. Learn how to write a good apology. You're in a startup, sooner or later, somebody's going to fuck up. And you need to learn how to say sorry. This is going to help you if you are having relationship problems too. So if you're considering a divorce or anything similar, you want to listen up to this part. If you have done something fucked up, and you say, I'm sorry you felt like that, guess what? It's over. If you have fucked up and you refuse to apologize at all and you won't say the word sorry, it's over. What you have to recognize is that sometimes you've got to be the person who says sorry, even if you think you're right, even if you think the other person is overreacting, because you can't just let it spiral out of control. And by saying sorry, by writing the apology, you aren't giving up control, you're taking control of the situation because you're the one shaping where this is going. So, if there's an issue where you have let's say you're working for a fossil fuel company and you've gone in and you've destroyed a native habitat and you're the PR person who's doing some of that work, some of that comm stuff. And yes, this is from personal experience. And yes, I have done evil PR stuff, don't judge me. It paid the bills and I have some really nice dresses. If you are going in there and the company has destroyed a natural habitat, you don't want to just go in and be like, we're sorry that this has been received in this way. You want to say, we apologize as a company for what we've done here and we recognize the harm we've caused and these are the steps we're taking to not do it again. Because as soon as you make an apology, people start to get off your back, the press cycle starts to move on, people stop caring because you've apologized, and so they think it's fine. You've got to be able to learn how to write that. Practice writing it now, like have an apology up your sleeve, get it ready to go. You don't know what's going to go wrong, but something will. As a fun case study, you should also be thinking about what your company's doing, where you're doing it, how you're doing it, when you're doing it, and whether you can avoid getting to a point where an apology is necessary. Like thinking ahead, being strategic, thinking about how people are going to perceive stuff, and trying to understand the way what you do will be received. So, to use the example I talked about just before, fossil fuel companies, if you had a situation where you needed to expand your operations, and the way to expand was to destroy a natural habitat, what you would do is run a really public campaign announcing that you were going to do something much worse, like destroy a much worse piece of land, create a much worse environmental impact, specifically so that when people got upset about it, you could can that plan and keep the other plan. So you got to think strategically about how to run like a public affairs, public communications, public relations campaign that enables you to avoid giving ground and avoid having to apologize too much while also still getting your way. And that's something that PR people have to do. We have to shape the narrative of the companies that we work for. Bear in mind, I do not work for fossil fuel companies. They suck. Don't destroy native wildlife, it's bad. All right, and the last thing here, look, this sounds like a really boring thing to finish on. UTM tag every single social link. The reason I finish on it is that it's actually important to think about. There's a few threads in this workshop that you might have picked up on about proving our value as comms people, proving our value as storytellers. You've got to look for every opportunity to do that. It's not that what we do doesn't have value. It does have a massive amount of innate value. The issue is that we have to communicate that to people and get them to understand it. And so at every opportunity, at every step of your process and your career and your work, you've got to make sure you're looking for these chances storytelling and demonstrate how your specific approach to it is contributing and helping. If you can do that, you will absolutely crush it and be very fucking good at content and comms. So the last thing I want to say here is this. This has nothing to do with the nitty-gritty of PR, but it's something that I've learned after a very long time in this industry. No matter what, you've got to be kind. You've got to be kind to your customers, to the press, to the people who are changed and impacted by your company. But you've also got to be true, and you've got to be yourself. You can't layer a bunch of crap between you and your audience. You've got to try to find a way to be human. I spent my 20s being a complete dick. I'll be really honest with you. I was pretty manipulative. I was obsessed with just being this PR person and being flashy and being successful. And I was an alcoholic, and I treated a lot of people pretty poorly. I thought that was the right way to be in this line of work because it's how a bunch of the other people that I looked up to acted. But it really was not. It's up to you, and it's your responsibility to make sure that you hold yourself to the necessary standard. And that standard has to be higher than it is going to be for a lot of other folks, because we have a responsibility when we're shaping messages, when we're telling stories, to do it right, not just by ourselves, but by the people who are going to be living in a different world because of the stories we've told. And so if you think about the PR that folks like, companies like Uber have done, they've been doing PR in the US and public affairs and public policy campaigns in the US to stop workers from being able to unionize. When you think about that kind of stuff, you have to recognize that we have a responsibility as PR folks to not just shape the message, but also make sure that it's the right message. And that is all I had in this little workshop. I wanted to make sure I had some time for questions and chats and stuff like that. So I'll go through this and I'll have a look at what we've got here. do we have any questions at all? If you do, just feel free to put them in the chat or QA channel.
Hey, Joan, it's Danielle. Quickly, do you want to stop screen sharing and then I'll put on?
Yeah, cool. Sounds good.
Hello, back again. Hey, yeah, if anyone has any questions for Joan, just feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
Literally, ask anything. I'm an open book.
So Joan, anything, just a quick question around slide 16. I think it's one of the challenges is you've got to be so many things to so many people across so much. So that's slash. So can you talk a bit about how to best do that?
Yeah, learn. Always be learning. I don't ever think you're good at one thing, therefore it's enough. Literally just, if you can take courses on it, take courses. If you can take masterclasses, take masterclasses. If you can literally just watch a bunch of videos, do that. But keep on trying to push your skills. And you know, you don't have to sit out there and just go, okay, I'm going to learn everything I need to know now about how to make content. But every time you are required to make a piece of content, look at the tools you need, look at the process and the workflows you have to follow, and then find a way to learn that so you can do it again next time.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Joan. Sorry. Hi, Joan, that's Catherine. Thanks for the presentation, it was awesome. I have a question regarding, you said keep on writing, keep on practicing, do whatever you can, but how do you get feedback? How do you evaluate how, you progressed? What's your...
Yeah, so there's a few ways. The first is the data will tell you. So if you're publishing stuff and people are responsive to it, people are enjoying it, the data will show you that. More clicks, more subscribers, more views, longer views, all that kind of stuff. And that's important. But you should also be looking for human feedback too. Go to your network. Who do you trust? Who don't you trust? Who's going to be brutally honest with you? For me, for example, if I want to get the most brutal feedback ever, I'll send it to my mum because she'll rip it apart. But like, make sure you're going to people and asking for their feedback all the time. Like, never think that any piece of content is perfect. You know, I mean, no matter who you are, your content is not perfect. Like, if the Beatles came to me tomorrow and asked me what's wrong with the White Album, I could absolutely tell them.
Thanks, John.
Hey, we have a question from Troy. Hi, Troy. Do you want me to read out your question or do you want to ask directly? I'll read it out. So how do you balance brevity with quality in digital channels today? It seems attractive to get attention over providing value.
I mean, it really depends on how you define value. So for me, I'm just going to operate on the assumption that anything I say is valuable because I've said it. And so my goal is to get attention on what I've said. As long as you have faith that the stuff that you are saying, the stuff that you're making is actually worthwhile, you're okay. And I guess the question should be, just dialing it back here, not how to balance quality with attention, but focus purely on getting attention, but never publish anything that you don't believe in.
Thanks, Joan. Any other questions?
Yeah, hello, Amelia here. Thanks, Joan. That was a sensational presentation. I loved it. I have a question around, with an individual piece. Sometimes, like, I write some content and that, and often I find clients want to put in lots of messages in one piece. What are your thoughts around that? And what advice would you give if you're trying to sort of pare it back so that it doesn't become confusing for the end user?
I come across this all the time, and I have a few ways to solve it. There's nice ways and there's not so nice ways. The nice way is to say, I love all these messages and I love all these ideas, but because they're so good, I don't think that we're going to do them justice by putting them all in the one single piece, because people are going to miss it, and your ideas are worth more than that to me as a content creator. So I would like to break your ideas out into several different pieces so they all shine through, because I'm so excited to get audiences to look at them. That's a nice way of doing it. The next way you can do it is just say, yeah, that sounds great, and then do whatever you want to do and say sorry afterwards. I do that a lot. The third way of doing it is just kind of lie about it. And if somebody says, okay, I really need all of these messages in the one piece, just say, oh, that's not LinkedIn best practice, and it's better not to do it that way, or the algorithm won't like it. You can blame a lot of stuff on algorithms.
I love that. Thank you. So good.
Hey, Amelia, thanks for joining. Hey, Joan, we've got a question here from Bronwyn Parsi. Sorry, broken microphone there. What would be some things you would delve into when making meaningful content? I loved what you said about the DNA and was hoping for a little more on that.
Sure. So I do this a lot with clients at my PR agency. I have brilliant clients, passionate clients who love what they're doing and they love their mission and they're so excited about it. So I actually treat them as interview subjects, and I pretend that I actually am a journalist, but I put on my journalist hat and I interview them, sit down just on a Zoom call, on a Meet call. I interview them about the stuff that they're truly passionate about. And I record the call and I get a transcript of it. And then in that transcript, there is always so much gold. Because when these folks, these passionate, driven entrepreneurs are talking about what makes them tick, they can't help surfacing that gold. They can't help showing you the DNA of why they care. It's a really simple, straightforward, powerful way to create content, and it can actually save you a lot of time as well.
Amazing. Any other questions?
Yeah, Robin Sands here. I had some guidance from a journalist, and they were suggesting when you send something to them to make it as easy as possible, include a picture and a document. And you were saying to use Google Docs and not include pictures. Do you think there's both sorts of journalists out there that get turned off by one or the other method?
There's a bunch of journalists who would prefer to get a photo and a document in their emails, for sure. But what those journalists aren't understanding is that if you're emailing them for the first time with an image and a document, there's a much higher chance you're going to get picked up by a spam filter, or you're going to get filtered out by their organization's email kind of rules. And these news organizations have pretty solid filters set up. And so you're just not going to get cut through. So my advice is always, the first time you email anybody, whether this is a pitch to a journalist or a pitch to somebody else, or you just want to contact somebody, don't have attachments. It's just going to help you get through.
Good thought.
Hey, we have a question from Joshua Anali. Is there a way to get a transcript without manually doing it yourself?
Yes, my favorite tool ever, otter.ai. It is a brilliant tool that you just upload a video. Otter AI. Otter is in the cute little animals, and AI as in the thing everyone pretends that their startup has. And so you just upload a video or an audio file, whatever it is, and it automatically transcribes it. And it's so good. Like the transcripts I get from there are often better than human transcripts. So like I cannot rave enough about this product. It's brilliant. Everyone should have it. I have the iPhone app open anytime I'm in a meeting, and I ask people if it's okay if I record the meeting, regardless of whether it's a coffee or anything else, and it just produces a live transcript as I go. So just get Otter.
Excellent. Thanks very much. How do we find out more about you?
You can go to joanwestenberg.com. You can follow me on Twitter. You can check out my Linktree, which is Linktree/Joan Westenberg, or you can find me on Instagram, where I occasionally post pictures of kittens and non-alcoholic beer. I'm everywhere. There's actually only one other Joan Westenberg out there, and she died in the 90s. I researched while looking her up, and she had a pretty cool life, but she's not as online as I am, so you won't get us confused.
Amazing. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a great afternoon. Enjoy this.
Thanks, folks.
And thank you so much, Joan. See you soon.
Peace.
It's a crazy world we're living in, and I just can't see it.